Julian Vance stood at his office window on the 42nd floor, watching the city below like a king surveying his kingdom. Numbers danced in his head: profit margins, property values, renovation costs. At 35 years old, he had built an empire of glass and steel. Vance Properties owned half the luxury buildings in the city, and Julian owned Vance Properties. To Julian, people were like numbers on a spreadsheet: useful or not useful, profitable or not profitable. He didn't think this made him cruel. He thought it made him smart. But for 3 weeks now, something had bothered him, something he couldn't quite calculate. Her name was Sarah. She cleaned his penthouse apartment every day. Quiet, efficient, almost invisible. Julian barely noticed her at first, the way most people barely notice the person who takes away their trash or wipes down their counters. Then he started seeing the pain. It was small at first, the way Sarah gripped the edge of the kitchen counter when she thought no one was looking, the slight wince when she bent down to pick up his scattered newspapers, the trembling hand that reached for the vacuum cleaner. Sarah was pregnant, very pregnant. Her belly was round and full, and she moved like every step hurt. Why is she still working? Julian asked his building manager, a sharp-faced woman named Mrs. Chun. "She needs the money, Mr. Vance," Mrs. Chun said, not looking up from her tablet. "She's a good worker, never complains, always on time." Julian nodded. That should have been the end of it. Good workers were valuable. But the question stuck in his mind like a splinter. He started watching Sarah more carefully. She arrived every morning at exactly 7 o'clock, carrying a small backpack that looked older than she was. She cleaned his apartment with quiet precision, never making eye contact, never speaking unless he spoke first. And every single day, at exactly 5 o'clock, she left. Not 5:15, not 5:30, exactly 5. Where does she go? Julian wondered aloud one afternoon. His assistant, Marcus, no relation to Sarah's late husband, though Julian didn't know that yet, looked confused. "Sir, the maid, Sarah, where does she go at 5? Marcus shrugged. "Home, I assume?" But something about the way Sarah hurried out every evening didn't look like someone going home. It looked like someone running from something, or running toward something urgent. Julian began noticing other things. The catered lunch he left on the counter every day, expensive sandwiches from the Italian deli downstairs, remained untouched when Sarah cleaned around them. She never ate during her shift, never took a break, never sat down. One morning, he saw her hand shake so badly while dusting his bookshelf that she nearly dropped a rare first edition. "Are you all right?" he asked. Sarah jumped like he'd shouted. "Yes, Mr. Vance. I'm fine. So sorry." Her voice was thin, exhausted, the kind of tired that sleep can't fix. "When is the baby due?" Sarah's hand moved protectively to her belly. 6 weeks, sir." 6 weeks. And she was still scrubbing floors and carrying vacuum cleaners up and down stairs. "Do you have someone to help you?" "Family." Something flickered across Sarah's face. Pain, deep and raw. "No, sir. It's just me now." Julian wanted to ask more, but Sarah turned away quickly, busying herself with organizing his already organized desk. That night, Julian couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Sarah's trembling hands, her exhausted eyes, the way she touched her belly like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. The next day, he made a decision that would change everything. He would follow her. It felt wrong. Julian knew that. He was a billionaire, not a detective. What Sarah did after work was none of his business. But the questions burned in his mind. Where did she go at exactly 5 o'clock? Why did she never eat? Why did she look so scared all the time? On a crisp October afternoon, when golden leaves tumbled down the streets like tiny dancers, Julian watched from his window as Sarah left the building at 5 p.m. He grabbed his coat and followed. She walked quickly despite her pregnancy. One hand supported her back, the other clutching her worn backpack. She didn't take the subway. She didn't catch a bus. She just walked block after block through neighborhoods that grew shabbier with each turn. Julian stayed far behind, feeling more uncomfortable with every step. This was wrong. This was invading her privacy. but his feet kept moving. After 30 minutes, Sarah turned into an alley behind a luxury boutique called Margot's. Julian's heart sank. He knew that store. His company owned the building. He crept closer, staying in the shadows. What he saw made his blood turn to ice. Behind the boutique, near the loading dock where delivery trucks came and went, was a small space between two dumpsters. Someone had arranged cardboard boxes to form a makeshift shelter. A single thin blanket lay folded in the corner. A plastic water bottle sat next to a mostly eaten turkey sandwich wrapped in gas station plastic. Sarah lowered herself carefully onto the cardboard, wincing with pain. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders and closed her eyes. She was sleeping here. His maid, the woman who cleaned his $5 million penthouse every day, was homeless, sleeping on a loading dock behind a building his company owned. Julian stood frozen, his expensive shoes rooted to the dirty alley pavement. His mind raced with impossible questions. How long had she been living like this? Why hadn't she asked for help? How was she still showing up to work every day, cleaning and smiling and pretending everything was fine? The October wind picked up, and Sarah shivered under her thin blanket, even in her sleep. Julian Vance, billionaire CEO, master of logic and profit, felt something crack open in his chest. Something he hadn't felt in years. He felt his heart break. Julian couldn't move. He stood in the shadows of the alley, watching Sarah sleep on cardboard like it was the most normal thing in the world. The city hummed around them, cars honking, people laughing, the distant sound of a street musician's violin. But in this alley, behind his building, time seemed to stop. How many nights had she slept here? How many mornings had she woken up on this cold concrete, then walked into his warm penthouse to make his life comfortable? The thought made Julian feel sick. He stepped forward, his shadow falling across Sarah's makeshift bed. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw him standing there, her face went white with terror. "Mr. Vance." She struggled to sit up, clutching her belly. "I can explain." "Don't." Julian's voice came out rougher than he intended. He took a breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions raging inside him. "Just tell me the truth. How long have you been sleeping here?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She looked down at her hands, at the dirt under her fingernails, at the worn fabric of her work uniform. 3 weeks, she whispered. 3 weeks. 21 days. 21 nights on cardboard while he slept on Egyptian cotton sheets, worth more than most people's monthly rent. Why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you ask for help? A bitter laugh escaped Sarah's lips. "Ask who, Mr. Vance? Mrs. Chun? She told me I was lucky to still have a job. That pregnant women are unreliable, and I should be grateful she kept me on." Julian's jaw tightened. "Tell me everything. From the beginning." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, the story spilled out. Her husband's name was Marcus. He had been a construction worker, strong, kind, always making her laugh. They weren't rich, but they were happy. They lived in a small apartment in a building called Cedar Arms, saving every penny for the baby that was coming. Then, in July, Marcus fell from a scaffold at a work site. He died before the ambulance arrived. Sarah's voice broke as she said this, tears streaming down her face. Julian felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. "I couldn't work for 2 weeks," Sarah continued, wiping her eyes. "I couldn't get out of bed. Couldn't eat. Couldn't think. The baby was all I had left of Marcus, and I was so scared I'd lose that too." When Sarah finally pulled herself together enough to return to work, she found an eviction notice on her apartment door. Cedar Arms was raising the rent. The new monthly payment was $800 more than before. $800, Sarah repeated, her voice hollow. "I was already struggling to make rent before Marcus died. After he was gone, with just my income..." She shook her head. "I wrote a letter to the building management. I begged them to give me time. I explained about Marcus, about the baby, about how I just needed a few months to figure things out." "What did they say?" "Nothing. I never heard back. 2 weeks later, I was locked out. Everything I owned was put in storage. Storage I couldn't afford to pay for. So now it's gone. All of it. Marcus's clothes, our wedding photos, the crib we bought for the baby. Julian felt cold all over. Which building did you live in? Cedar Arms, you said? Yes, on Parkside Avenue. Julian knew that address. He knew it very well. Cedar Arms was a Vance Properties building. The realization hit him like a freight train. His company had evicted her. His automated rent increase system had flagged her apartment as underperforming. His efficiency algorithms had calculated that they could get more money from new tenants. His managers had processed eviction without ever seeing her letter, without ever knowing about Marcus, without ever caring that they were putting a pregnant widow on the street. The building on Parkside, Julian said slowly. The one with the red awning? Sarah nodded. Julian's hands clenched into fists. That's my building. I own Cedar Arms. Sarah's eyes went wide. You what? Vance Properties owns that building. I own Vance Properties. Julian's voice was barely a whisper. I did this to you. The words hung in the air between them like poison. Sarah stared at him, her face a mixture of shock, anger, and something else, something that looked almost like pity. You didn't know, she said quietly. That doesn't matter. Julian's voice cracked. I should have known. It's my company, my responsibility. I built a system that treats people like numbers, like problems to be solved, like inconveniences to be removed. And that system destroyed your life. He thought about all his spreadsheets, all his profit calculations, all his meetings where they discussed maximizing property value and eliminating underperforming units. Behind every number was a person, a life, a story like Sarah's. How many others had his company hurt? How many families had been torn apart by a pursuit of profit? I have $3 billion, Julian said, and it sounded obscene in this dirty alley. $3 billion. And you're sleeping on cardboard behind my building, carrying your dead husband's baby, eating gas station sandwiches. Sarah wrapped her arms around her belly protectively. I'm not asking for charity, Mr. Vance. This isn't charity. This is justice. This is me fixing what I broke. Julian pulled out his phone. You're not sleeping here tonight. You're not sleeping here ever again. Mr. Vance. Please. He looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time. Let me help you. Not because I'm your boss. Not because I own your building. But because it's the right thing to do. Because no one should have to live like this. Sarah's tears came harder now. I'm so tired, she whispered. I'm so tired of being strong. I'm so tired pretending I'm okay. I'm so tired of being scared that my baby will be born in this alley. Julian felt something inside him change. All his life, he built walls between himself and other people. Walls made of money and power and cold logic. But standing in this alley, looking at Sarah's exhausted face, those walls crumbled to dust. You don't have to be strong anymore, he said softly. Not tonight. Let me carry this for you. He made 3 phone calls. The first was to his personal driver. The second was to the guest suite in his building, a luxurious apartment he kept for important visitors. The third was to Mrs. Chun. That conversation was very short and very cold. You're fired, Julian told her. Clear out your desk tonight. Then he turned to Sarah and held out his hand. Come on, let's get you somewhere warm. Sarah took his hand and let him help her up as they walked out the alley together. She looked back once at the cardboard and the thin blanket. I thought I'd die there, she said quietly. You're not going to die, Julian promised. You're going to live. And your baby is going to be born safe and warm and loved. For the first time in 3 weeks, Sarah smiled. The guest suite felt like a palace to Sarah. Soft carpet under her feet. A real bed with clean sheets. A kitchen with a refrigerator full of food. She stood in the middle of the living room, touching things like she couldn't believe they were real. The bathroom is through there, Julian said, pointing. There are clean towels, soap, everything you need, and the kitchen is fully stocked. Eat whatever you want, whenever you want. Sarah turned to him, tears streaming down her face again. Why are you doing this? Julian thought about that question. A month ago, he would have had no answer. A month ago, he wouldn't have been here at all. But something had changed in that alley. Something fundamental and permanent. Because I was wrong, he said simply. About everything. That night, while Sarah slept in a real bed for the first time in 3 weeks, Julian sat in his penthouse and made a list. Not a list of profits or properties or investment opportunities. A list of everything he needed to fix. The next morning, he called an emergency meeting with his entire management team. They sat around the conference table in their expensive suits, looking confused. Julian never called emergency meetings. Julian ran everything through email and reports and quarterly reviews. We're changing how we do business, Julian announced, effective immediately. He pulled up the Cedar Arms file on the screen. 3 months ago, we raised rents at this property by 40%. Does anyone remember why? A young manager named Todd spoke up. The algorithm identified it as underperforming. Sir, we could get higher paying tenants, so we evicted 18 families. Julian cut him off. 18 families. Did anyone read the appeals? The letters? The requests for extensions? Uncomfortable silence filled the room. I'll take that as a no, Julian said coldly. One of those families was a pregnant woman whose husband had just died. She begged for mercy. She begged for time. And we threw her on the street. He let that sink in. I found her 3 weeks later, sleeping on a loading dock behind one of our buildings, eating garbage, terrified her baby would be born in an alley. Julian's voice was hard as steel. That ends today. All of it. He outlined new policies. Every eviction would be personally reviewed by a human being, not an algorithm. Every tenant request would be read and considered. Rent increases would be reasonable, not predatory. And anyone who couldn't afford rent due to death, illness, or job loss would get 6 months of assistance to get back on their feet. This will cost us millions, the CFO protested. I don't care, Julian said flatly. We're still going to be profitable, just not by destroying people's lives. He looked around the table at their shocked faces. Anyone who has a problem with this can leave now. I'll write you an excellent recommendation letter. But if you stay, you follow these rules. We build buildings, yes, but we also build homes. We're responsible for the people who live in them. No one left. Over the next 3 months, everything changed. Julian personally reviewed every property Vance Properties owned. He met with tenants. He listened to their stories. He learned their names. He discovered a single mother working 3 jobs to afford rent. He gave her a rent reduction and a scholarship fund for her kids. He found an elderly veteran living in a unit with broken heat. He had it fixed within 24 hours and fired a manager who had ignored the complaint for 6 months. He met dozens of people like Sarah, good people struggling to survive in a city that had become too expensive for the people who actually made it run. And he helped every single one of them. His board of directors thought he'd lost his mind. His investors worried he'd gone soft. But Julian didn't care. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was building something that mattered. Sarah bloomed during those 3 months. With stable housing and regular meals, her pregnancy became easier. The fear left her eyes. She smiled more. She even laughed sometimes. Julian visited her often, bringing groceries and baby supplies. They talked about Marcus, Sarah's Marcus, and Julian learned about the man who had loved her so completely. He learned about their dreams for their child, their hopes for the future that had been stolen too soon. He would have been a wonderful father, Sarah said one evening, her hand on her belly. Then we'll make sure his child knows that, Julian promised. We'll tell them stories about Marcus, about how brave he was, how kind, how much he loved them even before they were born. One cold January night, Julian's phone rang at 2 a.m. It's time, Sarah's voice said, breathless with pain and excitement. The baby's coming. Julian drove her to the hospital himself, holding her hand when contractions hit, telling her to breathe, promising her everything would be okay. He sat in the waiting room while Sarah went into delivery. Around him, other families waited, nervous fathers, excited grandparents, fidgety siblings. Julian had no family, no wife, no children of his own. But sitting there, waiting to hear if Sarah and her baby were safe, he realized something. Family wasn't just about blood. It was about showing up. It was about caring. It was about choosing to be there for someone, even when it wasn't convenient or profitable or logical. At 6:47 a.m., a nurse came out smiling. "Mr. Vance, you can come in now." Sarah lay in the hospital bed, exhausted but glowing, and in her arms, wrapped in a soft blue blanket, was a tiny baby boy. "I'd like you to meet Marcus," Sarah said softly. "Marcus Julian." Julian's throat tightened. "You named him after me?" "You saved our lives," Sarah said simply. "Both of us. You gave us a chance when the world said we didn't matter. How could I name him anything else?" Julian sat down in the chair beside the bed. Sarah carefully placed baby Marcus in his arms. The infant was so small, so light, so impossibly fragile. His tiny fingers curled around Julian's thumb. Looking down at that perfect little face, Julian understood something he'd never understood before. All his billions, all his buildings, all his power and success, none of it mattered as much as this moment. None of it was as valuable as the trust Sarah had placed in him. None of it was as precious as this tiny life that almost never got a chance to exist. "Thank you," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to Sarah or to baby Marcus or to the universe itself. "No," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. You gave us everything. A home, a future, hope." Julian shook his head. "You gave me more. You taught me what really matters. You showed me that wealth without compassion is just empty." He looked up at the hospital window. Outside, the sun was rising over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. His buildings stood tall against that sunrise, their glass and steel gleaming. He had built an empire, but Sarah had built something more important. She had built courage in the face of loss. She had built love in the midst of despair. She had built hope when the world offered only darkness. And now, together, they had built a future. Baby Marcus yawned, his tiny mouth opening wide. Julian laughed, a real, genuine laugh that came from somewhere deep inside him. "Welcome to the world, little guy," he said softly. "It's not perfect. It's not always kind. But it's full of people who care. And I promise you, you're going to be surrounded by love every single day of your life." Sarah smiled. "We both will be." Julian Vance, billionaire CEO, master of logic and profit, had learned the greatest lesson of his life. True wealth wasn't measured in dollars or buildings or power. It was measured in the lives you touched, the people you helped, the difference you made. And in that moment, holding a baby named after him in his arms, Julian knew he was the richest man in the world. This story reminds us that behind every number, every statistic, every underperforming unit, there's a real person with a real story. Sometimes the greatest success isn't building an empire. It's having the courage to tear down your own walls and rebuild with compassion. If this story touched your heart, please like this video to help others find it. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness can change everything. And subscribe for more powerful stories that will make you think, feel, and see the world differently. What would you have done in Julian's place? Have you ever discovered something that completely changed how you see the world? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember, we all have the power to make someone's life better. Sometimes all it takes is opening our eyes to see the people we've been overlooking. Thank you for reading, and may you always have the courage to choose compassion over comfort.